In the 1970s, I did quite a lot of cruise work, both as a lecturer and as an entertainer. Just to give you an idea, I worked on the QE2 20 times, going to the Caribbean and back and forth to New York and out of Miami. And Cunard knew me very well. They decided to buy a large hotel right in the heart of London in Hammersmith called the Cunard International. And one of their proud boasts was that they had one of the largest ballrooms in London. And they wanted to sell that idea to their prospective clients. So they asked me, can you devise something that will sell the idea of how large our ballroom is? After a lot of thought and a lot of preparation, this is what I did. I took 1/3 of the ballroom, turned it sideways, and built a little stage one side and made it look like a ship with some life rafts. The decking and the cords and the rails looked very much like a ship's end. And I stood there in a blazer with the Cunard badge on my pocket and white trousers and white shoes, and gave a sales presentation to a set of clients who were seated in front of me. I suppose there were about 60, 70 men, mostly men. I gave a demonstration and a sales talk about the facilities of the hotel and so on. And then I said, but we have another room adjoining this one, which is as large as this one, but unfortunately I can't show it to you at the moment because there's a function going on. And there seemed to be a murmur of disappointment when I said, well, if you can promise me to be very, very quiet, we've got some hinge doors that open up, zigzag doors that open all the way, the whole panel of the wall opens up, and if you keep very quiet, I'll just let you look at a glimpse of the room, but please don't make a sound. With that, these huge doors opened, and they looked to their side, and they saw that there was a private function going on with about 80 or 90 diners sitting around tables. There was a top table with some hosts and the guests being entertained by a gypsy violinist who was circulating around the tables. There was a toastmaster who suddenly banged his gavel and said, "My lords, ladies and gentlemen, please be silent," for he announced the speaker. Well, at that moment the doors closed again because after all it was a private function and we didn't want to disturb them. But what they had seen at that moment was a full dining room with champagne buckets and glasses and cutlery and all the food and flowers on the table. They'd seen the gypsy violins, they'd seen the top table, they'd seen the top table guests and so on. They felt they were intruding a bit, watching it. And then I only spoke for about 3 or 4 minutes to say, well, you can imagine if we put those two rooms together, how big this room is. And they were suitably impressed. And I said, but we have another surprise for you. And the doors opened again, and they couldn't believe their eyes, because now there were no diners, no top table. They thought maybe they were looking in the wrong direction. Instead, it was a huge room, much, much larger than they expected. At the far end, the whole wall was covered with a replica of Buckingham Palace. And it looked three-dimensional, it looked real. In front of Buckingham Palace were some gates with a gap in between, and going all the way from where they were sitting were large flagpoles that got smaller and smaller, and the optical illusion of the distance and the picture of the mall going towards Buckingham Palace was very realistic. They couldn't believe their eyes. And at that moment, we heard a muffled drum. It got louder and louder, and then the bass drum started. And then it continued, and suddenly you heard music, a military band. You heard trumpets, trombones, saxophones playing, cymbals crashing, drums, and from behind the gates came 2 by 2 guard soldiers in their red uniform, their busbies, playing these instruments. They formed themselves into a line of four, started marching forward, and more of these soldiers came out, marching towards these surprised guests, playing the music which got louder and louder and louder, walking directly to them, and when they got up to them, they split, marched behind them, crossed over, came out again in perfect line, and just moved back down the mall, apparently down the mall, and the music got softer and softer until they all disappeared behind the gates and behind Buckingham Palace, and you heard just the drum going. And then complete silence. And whilst they were trying to catch the breath, the lights dimmed and everything was blacked out. The walls shut again, and I know that my audience sat there stunned because they couldn't believe what they'd just seen. But I think that demonstration of mine with Buckingham Palace and all the soldiers marching and everything else that happened, I think really illustrated the size of that room, so that the clients would know when they have the next conference, they would be able to book a very, very large room in London.